This is Making It Here and There. Welcome to the show.
Joseph Friedman has merged his passions for travel, discovery, and environmentalism into a multi-directional life, on land, in the skies, and under the sea. He is a flight attendant by trade, yet his love of learning, adapting, and meeting new people has taken him beyond the runway. Joseph believes that travel is not about the destination. It's about the journey to appreciate culture and history, destroy division and fear, and cultivate your own personal growth. You can see Joseph's journeys, photographs, and art pieces on Instagram using the handle JoJo's Friedman.
Thank you, Joseph, so much for coming on Making It Here and There. I'm so glad we're getting a chance to reconnect and chat about all the cool places you're going to and all the things you've been doing for the last couple of years.
Thank you for having me, Allison. I appreciate it.
So tell the world, what are you doing for work and what are you up to?
Sure. So I have been a flight attendant for Delta Airlines since April 2015, which next month will make 6 years. Being a flight attendant means long hours and lots of on your feet and developing an understanding for people's behavior based on their desires and verbal and physical actions. That's taken up the bulk of my time over the last 6 years, is flying and doing any number of flights in a day as well. And it really makes you appreciate when you're not working either.
And what were the series of events that led you into this career path?
Mm-hmm. So I would have to say that there are several each of people and then series of events that led it to me. Specifically to becoming a flight attendant at Delta, there was one person who really pushed me to do it. I had been working in 2014 at a hotel company, a family boutique hotel company in San Diego. They had 3 local resort hotels. And one of the girls that I was working with, and I was working in a call center doing reservations and sales, she had told me that she had gotten hired. She was going to leave the hotel and work for American because she just got hired as a flight attendant. Mm-hmm. She was going to go to training. And she was like, you should really apply for Delta. They're hiring. She had even said, this is kind of funny, she had worked for them the year before for Delta, but she actually got expelled from the training. She didn't pass the test required to complete it. And she had also worked for a jet company in San Diego, and I really enjoyed her stories. So I went on and I applied. It took I'd say around 5 or 6 months between when I had applied until when I went for training myself. Okay. Yeah, it was her motivation and stories that I was like, yeah, I really should go for it. I had interviewed with United back in 2012 when I was in New York, and I flew down to Houston for a job interview with them as a flight attendant, but I didn't get the job. But I did use that experience of having done in-person interview to be a flight attendant because it is pretty specific to what it is. I used that experience for when I went to Delta, and it definitely came in handy. Another kind of event that led me to my interest in this was, so when I met you back at the new school and I was working for AFS, I had a job with them where I would go to all 3 New York airports quite regularly, sometimes often all in the same day, meeting and greeting students for orientations and kind of chaperoning them around in between their study abroad experiences, whether they were coming to the US or coming back home from abroad, you name it. So I felt very comfortable being at airports, and that little ounce of airport glamour was something I really enjoyed, and it got me interested in where I am now.
So it's funny you mentioned just now the process by which to get hired. What are some qualities that you know, because I feel like when we think about flight attendants, like you just think you think of the meme where it's like you get to walk around and go trash, trash,
Oh yeah,
and like that's what people think. Like you just go around and like collect garbage and hand out food and drinks. Like what do they
that's
look
a fun
for?
one.
So
What do they look for?
yeah, what do they look for, and like what's the training process like?
Right. So when they're hiring, they kind of change it up every year a little bit. I've
Mhm.
known people who've gotten on the hiring team eventually
Mhm.
because you get hired by flight attendants and by human resources.
Oh,
But
okay.
they're looking for people who they feel could represent their brand the
Hmm.
best that they could, at least in my company. And they're looking for people who seem to have a happy persona about them as well, and people that are willing to do the work involved. It really comes down case by case. I think the more that the people interviewing you feel like they could develop a personal connection with you in the brief time that they're talking to you is what really sparks interest for them to hire the applicant, because that's what they're hoping that you'll bring on the airplane for the passengers is some kind of a personal connection despite being cramped with 300 people in a metal tube.
How do you give somebody a
Yeah.
personal connection when you're when you're just like, yeah, you're in the flying, I don't know what you want to call it,
You
just
know, it's surprisingly easier than you would think.
okay.
It's as simple as complimenting something, someone might be wearing something like, oh, I like that brand, little
Mhm.
things. It could be that, or you could be walking by someone like a little kid who's reading Harry Potter, and
Mhm.
you're like, oh, wonderful. And,
Yeah.
you can spark little conversation pieces just from that, even if it's only for 10 seconds.
Mhm.
And it's that kind of thing that makes you less robotic.
Right.
And
Right.
it's really that the less robotic you can be about it and the more personal is what really is the quality that they want.
So it's just about like you said, like establishing that rapport and having that like
Mm-hmm.
even little bit of small talk just to bring it
Yeah,
on like the hey, I'm normal just like you. You know, we're in this together.
correct. Yeah, it's the small talk, it's those little things. And it is amazing to see how long sometimes these conversations can go.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes you can be talking with people for 30 minutes. All of a sudden, like a half hour has gone by, you were talking to the same person about it. It started like with Harry Potter, and then it turned into anything, you name it. It could be any kind of conversation. And it is really cool. You meet a lot of interesting people that way.
Um, Now, I know we kind of talked about this before we started recording, but how does the schedule work for a flight attendant?
Yeah. So my schedule works by being able to accept constant change and predict anything will happen regardless of plan. So that means that whether I have a destination or amount of flights on my roster, it may not come to fruition by the end of the day.
Oh, wow.
But scheduling itself does work a few different ways. So flight attendants at my company get to bid for desired trip type, sign-in time, amounts of flights in a day, destination, aircraft specific type, that kind of thing. But then seniority determines the overall outcome. And in the 6 years, I have been pretty lucky overall with my bids. And the more I continue flying, the more I learn different kind of tricks to manipulate the system in bidding. And then when you bid, your schedule is released then for the following month. And once it's released, it still isn't locked down either. We have the ability to swap trips with other flight attendants. We can clear our schedule and drop trips, as we call it, which means that another flight attendant who has time off and is willing and available to work our trip will pick it up, kind of
Mhm.
like picking up a shift at a restaurant.
Right.
And then they take the trip from me. Then I can either choose to not work on those days, or I pick up a different trip in place if I need the hours. I can also just simply pick up what I want as extra when I want to, kind of like what I'm doing right now. even if none of my other trips dropped, because it's up to me if I want to post them for someone else's availability. We also have a computer system where we can swap with an open trip in the computer. So a position in a flight attendant crew that needs to be filled for that trip to function. And we have a certain amount of time we can do that by. And if we do, and it is available, it then means that we've taken ourselves off of a trip we already had and put that position as open for somebody else to switch with the computer. Yeah. Then it still gets trickier. So let's say you're getting to the day of and a position is still open. There, it would go to someone who's on access or reserve over those days. So you can have days where you're scheduled where you're on reserve as well.
Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah. That's a whole other topic for the scheduling.
Well, I feel like, even my job, like there are times you're on call, so you might not get called, or you might have a lot of calls. So it being that's
right.
So that happens. But okay. So like you said, and I think you said you make about 80 hours a month. Get roughly.
Yeah. So default is around 80. People sometimes work less. They sometimes work more. I tend to work between 80 and 100. And I know that sounds like a lot less to some people who are used to hearing 40. Right. You're used to hearing 40-hour work weeks. But the truth is, so imagine like this, you could have a 12 to 14-hour day, which is your duty day, but you may only work flying time of 7 hours in that 12 to 14 hours.
Right.
Because it includes when you report at the airport, which is generally an hour before the first flight leaves, and then you do your first flight, which could be like 2 or 3 hours, and then you're sitting at a different airport for another several hours. So even though you're doing what sounds like a lot less than someone else, you're still technically there for way longer than some people have traditional 8-hour work days.
Right. So the time that you're like in between, so like for right now, for example, you are at the hotel, this doesn't count towards your work hours.
No. So right now, exactly, good question. I am not earning my hourly flight pay that I would be making while I am on the aircraft. So when you are on your layover and your overnight, you're earning your per diem, but you're not earning your hourly flight pay. Correct. So there's a couple different pays that go on.
Pays, grades or whatever you want to call it. Okay. All right.
Right.
Now, how would you say language plays a role in your job?
Yeah. So language has played a role. This is one of the reasons why I find your podcast so interesting, and your guests, is you bring lots of people in different backgrounds.
Yeah.
Like I know you had Nora on recently, who's also a good friend of mine from the new school. So I've always been interested in other languages and intercultural communication, being able to engage with people that do not speak the same language and finding ways to communicate with them. Hand gestures work, of course, but demonstrations and smiles, slower movements, they go a long way in terms of showing approachability to somebody that may not understand me, or I may not understand them. Now, of course, I was educated in intercultural communication, and one of the first rules is to assume that others have not been educated in it. So I have to always remember that, especially on the airplane, that like the kind of educational background that we come from and our interests, a lot of other people in the world may not have had that. But and that often helps me kind of slow down as well, remembering that. But all of that aside, I do speak Spanish. So from having multiple study abroad and work experiences in Spanish-speaking countries, speaking Spanish has been helpful on many flights, even in the most random of routes within the United States. I've found using Spanish useful for me on Kansas City to Salt Lake City, for example. I've had to use it before, just as much as I've had to use it on a flight from New York City to Santo Domingo. It's, you know, you never know. You never know who's going to be on a flight and who needs your help in that sense. So to date, I have worked flights to every continent we fly to except for Africa. And I have not known the majority of languages that of the destinations that we fly to. And we often have bilingual flight attendants and bilingual passengers. And because the flights to most of those places are staffed with bilingual flight attendants, that definitely helps us all for the most part. The person who is a language flight attendant, they have added responsibilities for translating announcements and being supportive in case of a medical emergency on the airplane. What I love about having worked to destinations like China and Brazil is that I came on the plane not knowing any words in the languages of those countries. So in that case, Mandarin for mainland China and Portuguese for Brazil. But then I left my flight there at least having learned some of the necessities, even if I only was using them with a couple of people. But at least, you know, that's something that, like I said, has always interested me. So it makes it really fun for me to learn a few words here and there. One nice thing that I've seen amongst flight attendants is, despite the plethora of backgrounds that we all come from, whether they be racial, educational, age, or different career backgrounds we had, about every flight attendant that works internationally has some interest in learning to communicate better with people that they otherwise could not have been communicating with stepping onto that aircraft.
Yeah. And that's a relief, because, you know, you would hate to see it where it would be like the opposite. But I feel like that would be really unusual for somebody to dislike culture or anything, to be a flight attendant, especially, I mean,
yeah.
I mean, unless the airline only flies like domestically US, like I really would see that would be unusual, you know.
Right. Unless you're like, and no, I don't mean to disrespect, but unless you're like Air Wisconsin, where the furthest you might be going is Chicago.
You're throwing some airline shade.
Yes, it was. But so sorry to anyone who's listening who works for Air Wisconsin. But yeah, generally when you work for a legacy carrier or a company that does go internationally, there is an element. You could have come from, you know, you could have come from a background. I work with people all the time who had never left their home state before they became a flight attendant, which is something that was not the case for myself. But even if that was the case for them, they're there now and they want to be, and they want to learn. And desire is what really brings people far with this, and in learning about other people.
Wow. I mean, that's like, I mean, you definitely answered the question more than no, but it's you know, you would think, like, because you always see that, like, a lot of, if you're flying internationally, like, there are always a lot of the flight attendants are bilingual in some aspects. So, and like you said, you hear the pilot talking, there's always a translation that follows, or a few translations that follow depending on where you're flying to or from. So, you know, like you said, and at the end of the day, you know, you fall back on these nonverbal cues to at least get your point across.
Exactly.
So kind of related, but I did want to talk a little bit about, like, just the travel industry in general, because it is a topic that I'm very interested in, and I feel like I haven't had a chance to discuss this with anybody else on Making It Here and There. So I'm like kind of pumped. So just, like, in your opinion, like, why is traveling so important?
Right. So there are so many reasons why traveling is important, but traveling is important for everybody because it opens our minds. First and foremost is it opens our minds. Human behavior craves interaction with other people and experience in different places. And ability to travel opens that part of the soul and then engagement somewhere else nurtures it. Traveling does not just mean that you're doing what you see in magazines or on television with someone's incredible 3-week vacation. It's just as simple as stepping into your car and going on a nearby walk or hike or something in your own community that you might have never done. It can be as complex as leaving on a multi-year business move overseas as well. We as humans should not restrict ourselves to just being in our house or our home. And I know that's something that's been very hard for a lot of people over the last year. Our town or our city is our home, and our state is, our country is, and the world is our home as well. So all of these really are. And with the exception of the pandemic, travel has been easier and faster worldwide in the last 20 or so years than it has ever been in human history. I think I recognized that at a young age, I wanted to travel and I saw that ability available and I wanted to make sure that I made the most of it. I've gone on your run-of-the-mill bus tour trip. I've lived with host families in foreign countries. I've taken cooking classes abroad. I've studied in universities abroad. I've been to parties on cruise ships and local bars, you name it, and it's because of travel. Money is always the concern for most people, and rightfully so. But you have to do your research. If you can make it somewhere, don't just reserve the first thing you're going to see available to do. Put the time in and the effort to finding the most affordable way to go with it. And it doesn't mean the cheapest either, but find the thing that matches the quality of what you're looking for. You know, test yourself and your condition level and how comfortable you get. That's a part of why travel is so important as well. So I sat on a packed train with no air conditioning in Thailand for over 2 hours with probably over 50 people in that train car to go over 2 hours to go see ancient ruins. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it was far less comfortable and it was not air conditioned like some of the charter buses that exist from Bangkok to where I was going. But you know, it helped my budget out and I knew I was comfortable to do it. And I had the time, which was also important. And, you know, it was great.
You lived, you're fine. And you got to see what you wanted to see. It's not like.
Yeah, I did. I got to see what I wanted to see. I got to see these beautiful ruins that are similar, they say, to what Angkor Wat looks like in Cambodia, which is somewhere I'd like to go. But it's Ayutthaya, which was the old historical capital of Thailand before Bangkok.
And that's the same exact reason why, I mean, I know you said a lot, but you perfectly summed up how I felt. No,
right.
I feel, you know, the thing about, for me, like traveling is it's not, I know this is gonna sound super cliche, but it's not the destination, it's the journey, it's the experience, it's the people you meet, it's the people you chit chat with, it's the good, the bad, you know, it's the beautiful, and sometimes it's ugly, but you know, you see what's out there, because I feel like one of the worst things, and I feel like, you know, and I don't like to get like on my little soapbox, but you know, I feel like one of the things with that holds a lot of people back is just fear of the unknown.
I completely agree. Fear of the unknown is one of the biggest restraining factors that comes into it for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I'm not saying put yourself, I mean, anybody could put themselves in a dangerous situation or be foolish. Of course, like, use your head, you know, like don't be an idiot, you know. I mean, you see people, I mean, but again, you can see that here too. I mean, you can go to New York City and people walk around with headphones in and their head down and like they're walking into traffic, like, come on, what are you doing? But, you know, of course, like, and again, like, understand, you know, do a little research. I mean, I don't think you have to be, you have to speak the language fluently, but know a couple phrases, know how to say help, or know who to call, know the number for, you know, the equivalent of 911 in another country, or whatever the case may be. You know, use your head.
Definitely.
But having that I would say security, I use that in quotes, but having that in your back pocket is enough to just say, okay, well, I'm comfortable. I can go and do X, Y, and Z and have this amazing experience, because there's really nothing like it. Like the stories that I have from traveling, I mean, I can't take, you can't take those away. You can't take them away from me, but it's true.
No,
You know,
you can't take away some of the experiences you get from traveling. You can only add more to it.
right.
That's the thing. And it's really, it comes again to, fear being a big part of it. The less you are afraid and the more willing you are to travel and experience something, the more you're going to learn about yourself as well.
Definitely. And you learn what you learn, how do I say it? You learn what you're grateful for too. I mean, like what you have at home. I've said this before and people think I'm like insane by saying this, but it's true. Like you really, not that you necessarily miss home, but it makes you appreciate home a lot differently.
Absolutely. It really does. In traveling, and depending on any kind of travel, you learn a lot about yourself from the experiences you make when you're traveling. And you learn a lot about, like, let's say you still like to travel, and after doing something, but you didn't really like the way you do it. So then that's exactly it. You just learned. So you can change it up for the next time you go somewhere, or change up your routine when you are back home based on something you might have experienced on a journey.
And so kind of in the same vein of what we're talking about, one of the things that just gets me all fired up is the fact that I feel like a lot of the travel industry is based on this idea of the exotic, and you're going to go and you're going to see these beautiful things that you're going to put up on the gram, and it's like there's just absolutely no context, like whatsoever. There's no history behind any of these things. It's just beautiful pictures after beautiful pictures, beautiful people in front of beautiful pictures, et cetera, et cetera. What are your
Absolutely. So yeah, I may have already touched on it a bit, but I'll break it down again. The two most important words when asking about travel and exotic are those, travel and exotic, because each one kind of has a cornucopia of different definitions. Mm-hmm. So travel can be any movement that any person makes locally to globally, and why shouldn't globally be something locally as well? This is, travel is by foot, plane, train, automobile, etc. But then exotic gets a little bit more tricky to break down. But yeah, I'll give it a shot. So with exotic, we think of exotic as off the beaten path, palm trees on the yellow and white sandy beach, turquoise waters, misty snow-capped mountains, large loud skyscrapers, spicy food. But exotic is much more than that. Exotic literally means, by definition, of foreign origin or character. So exotic could be a New Yorker going to the Jersey Shore. Literally, could be that, or vice versa.
So,
pardon?
I said, let's not talk about the Jersey Shore.
Oh, no, we won't. It was
let's
not
talk about it.
So, yeah,
I mean, it's exotic. I mean, I'm from North Jersey. It's like exotic for me, so.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's the whole point. It's foreign to what you are accustomed to. So it is exotic. So, cultural norms, especially in the United States, have made the word exotic to seem that going to Tahiti in French Polynesia is more foreign than going to Italy. Mm-hmm. When in fact, they are both equally exotic, and anybody from any of those places coming to the United States would find our country exotic as well. It all depends on what we ourselves view. And I encourage everybody to find out what they feel is exotic to them and what they feel foreign means to them about it.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I feel like I think is that it's a foreign object, and as like I said, there's nothing wrong with being, like you said, on the beach with the palm trees, but yeah, I feel like like I said, it gets me all fired up. Like people will be like, "Oh, I've been to Jamaica," right? But it's like,
oh yeah,
But you were on like a
jealous.
compound, like, you know, I mean, unless you really were in like other parts of the country and, you know, experienced that for better or for worse, or however you feel about it. But you know what I mean? So it's interesting and then I think of like, actually, it's been exactly 3 years, not to cut into our story, but I was in Martinique.
Oh,
I was in Martinique 3 years ago. And what
nice.
was nice was you got to experience like the whole country. You know what I mean? It's, first of all, it's not a big country, but you know, of course we got to go on the beach and we went sailing, we went snorkeling, and we ate like all this amazing food, and we went hiking, and, you know, went to the pool and did, you know, all yada, yada, yada.
Yeah. You
But
had a
you
wonderful
know what I mean?
vacation.
We also went to like slave memorials, you know, to honor, you
Yeah.
know, because there was like, for example, there's like an area where there was like a shipwreck because slavery had been abolished, but people were still like, you know, smuggling them in, and they had like buried the smugglers, but they like left the other bodies of the enslaved at sea, and somebody had put
Wow.
this memorial together, and it's really poignant, just really beautiful. And they have like all these types of like memorials like around the country that like very simple, but like it hits you. There's like we went to
Yeah.
like a like I say reenactment, not like in like a bad way, but like they did like
Not the
like
Civil War
rebuilt like a
way.
slave village, and but like there was like stuff about how these people lived, and like, you know, you got to experience it. It was built by obviously a descendant of enslaved people, so it was you
Right.
got everything, I feel like, in that trip. Like I felt like I learned something, and also to people that really don't speak English, so most people do speak French or like
French.
Creole.
Yeah,
So
so you had a cultural and historical experience as well as a relaxing one.
right, yeah, definitely. And I was like, I can't. The weather was great, and it was, like I said, there were some challenges too. I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was one of those trips where, because they're really those compounds don't really exist there. I mean, there's hotels, of course, and there's some better hotels than other hotels, but there's really no. It's not like built into this you know, travel agency system where you go to the compound and you stay on the compound and you eat all this food, and the only interactions you have with people that live there are ones who work there. So, and I say work there, work on the compound. So it's
Right. So in that case, it makes you really remember when you went to the kind of heritage site that you did.
yeah, definitely. And like I said, we interacted with locals in like I said, mostly positive. I mean, we had some interesting experiences, but most of them were
Of course.
positive. And we definitely, you know, it was definitely, I got a lot more out of it than I would say maybe going to something where you're on a compound. I'm just using this as an example, and, you know, I'm not bashing anybody who's gone on any of these other types of trips. But I did really want to touch on that, and I wanted your opinion, and I didn't mean to interject on my little story, but that was
Oh no, I love it. It's any little thing like that, and obviously you learned a lot from it, and it's something you still remember and think about because it was that impactful.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good, and that's what you want from somewhere. Like the last thing you want is a negative experience, I
know you mean by
negative experience, but you don't want to have come back from traveling and just hate life. You want to, there's ups and downs when you're traveling, but you want to really take advantage of what you can.
I know some of these questions, I feel like you touched on a lot of them. Let's see. Well, what are your thoughts on like politics and how that impacts travel?
Yeah, sure. So in case you didn't know, but we've had enough educational experiences together, even in the one semester that I was with you at the new school. I'm sure that you know that I'm a fairly open-minded person when it comes to politics. Also, given that we both attended a graduate school program that shows that we had, or previous education to graduate school, it shows that we had to pass enough tests demonstrating understanding and coherence. So I say all of this because it means that there is proof that we can know what information we are seeing means and its validity and its accuracy. we aren't just believing what we're told, we are questioning it and we're analyzing it. Unfortunately, I have found that through a lot of travel, especially since 2016, how many people in the United States and abroad do not understand information accurately about politics. And I really noticed it in 2016. That was a wake-up call for me, literally on the day of the election, and more importantly, the day after the 2016 election, was the interconnectedness between politics and travel. You could say that despite this knowledge level that I'm talking about, at least for us, that I was still blinded as to how many people fell for the scam that Trump's first campaign brought and ultimately got him the election. It was literally the morning after, merely 5 hours after midnight, that I started to see how many people had supported him. And I really processed it then. Since then, that number has grown, but also resistance to the movement, to that movement, more importantly, has grown as well. But the Trumpist movement is louder and more vocalized simply because of that one win. It's a movement that's based on populism and nationalism, disinformation, and scapegoating. And which, these are all forces behind Hitler and Mussolini as well, topics that we learned about at school. And this is where, when I began to answer the question, connecting like our educational backgrounds, for example, we get the theory behind it, the theoretical process into that Hitler Mussolini conversion mentality that others may not see. So through travel, I was able to discover how many people really aren't educated in these kinds of behaviors like we would be, and being able to correlate political behavior to individual people. We have television entertainment screens on the airplane, and I have literally seen in one row someone watching CNN or MSNBC, and then a row behind or in front someone watching Fox News, and they're covering the same topic. All these stations, they'll cover the same topic, but the approach and the language used is completely different. So this dynamic is something that is dangerous for our society, and the real builder of division I see while I travel around the country. We speak and we repeat the information we're fed if we do not know how to rationalize and analyze it, and politicians know that. Traveling internationally, you generally see a more informed crowd of people, but it doesn't mean that you share the same political views as they do. It just means, or allows for a little bit of assurance that critical thinking skills are there when it comes to those topics.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what we were saying before about fear, and that's a platform that is, I don't want to say easy to push, but I feel like you can get in people's heads when you make them really scared. So you can make them
really can.
And go ahead.
Oh, no. You go. Continue.
No. I mean, even like I think about, and I have not been to this country, but I think about China, like just the backlash that, when you keep saying China virus, it reminds you that the virus, or they're telling you the virus came from this country, and it doesn't represent the country itself. I mean, and I'm not, like I said, I've not been to China, but it still like. So I can't speak on like actually going there, but I just feel like that is like the one example of like putting fear into people. Like, well, that place must be filled with viruses,
Absolutely,
filled with wet markets. And I'm not saying those don't exist, but I'm just saying like that's what they're perpetuating constantly in the rhetoric, and that's what's very harmful, and that's why there are hate crimes, and it's just like no.
It is. It's that Goebbels thing of repeating things. And it's funny you mentioned that specific terminology. Back at the beginning of January, right after New Year's. So I think the vaccines were approved in a few months ago in December. Anyway, I was working a flight domestically, and I had a passenger board the aircraft. We're handing out like fanny wipes right now when people get on the plane so they can kind of wipe off their seat just for peace of mind. Anyway, handing it to someone who boards the plane, and he says to me, "Oh, I don't need that. I'm as good as they get." And I was like, "Okay, I'm just offering." And he goes, "Well, I've already had the vaccine and I've had the China virus."
Oh no! Oh,
Yeah,
I know you're.
and I was standing there with someone I was working with, and
your eyes bugged
at
out.
least I was wearing a mask because my jaw did drop, but you couldn't see it because I'm wearing a mask. But which thankfully so was he. But it's that rhetoric, like you were saying, is fear mongering. It's the Goebbels. It's creating xenophobia, which is literally fear of a foreign entity, let's say. And it worked for, as we know, it worked for at least 74 million people. And it's really sad how strong fear is in political rhetoric, and you do see people's behavior affected by it when I'm traveling. Yeah, I do see people's behavior has changed, like I said, since 2016 specifically. And it's really unfortunate to see that kind of decline in human confidence.
Yeah, and like I said, it's I'm curious because you're in that you're in that zone every day, so you see what the behaviors that people are exhibiting, and I was just really curious about that. There was something else I wanted to ask you about regarding that. Oh, so speaking of that, you mentioned Hitler. Not to give him a spotlight, but
of course.
No, but you are Jewish and you are working on a project right now.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about that? I know it's kind of not quite with the travel, but you brought it up, so
I sure. So just quick backstory. Yeah, I like to do different projects outside of traveling and flying, and because I do very much love to be home too. But I'm doing a little research writing for a social media startup called On This Day in Jewish History, and it's been an interesting opportunity for me to be learning more about my own cultural background and history of the Jewish people that I didn't really know before with different topics. So yeah, that's just one of the things that I've been doing this season.
And I feel like Jewish history, and again, like I'm gonna have to follow it because I don't know. I know a little bit, of course, but I don't know everything. But I feel like the Jewish people in general. I mean, you talk about somebody who's global, who's cosmopolitan. They've been in traveling throughout centuries. I feel like there's a piece of Jewish history probably just about everywhere. I don't really know where it wouldn't exist at this point. So I feel like that is a global topic, and again, especially given like the fear that and anti-Semitism that you thought would go away, but I guess is still unfortunately present.
Right, you would think that it would. It doesn't, and it isn't, and a lot of it, I believe, comes from misinformation. It's also interesting, and you see this today more than ever when it comes to anti-Semitism, is politically speaking, it's from the far right, it's also from the far left. It just depends on the context, but no matter which angle it's from, it's still anti-Semitism, and it's still unacceptable. It's no different than being anti-anything.
Right.
And there are Jews in all over the world, and it is a culture that especially through a lot of anti-Semitic means, it is a culture and religion that is around the world because people were kicked out of their homeland originally.
Right. And like you said, I mean, I wouldn't even just say, obviously it's not just this country. You talk about worldwide. I mean, there are apparently, I say there are apparently, we don't know if this is true. I'm not going to say which countries specifically that I saw this in, but there are textbooks that talk about, like equating Jewish people to like the devil and like all that. textbooks for children in school. Like,
yeah, there are
it's
places
like,
where
what?
they do show that.
And it's just nuts. It's nuts. And this is why I'm tying it back to the travel. I mean, when you realize that, like, hey, there's nothing to be fearful of. Like, I mean, if somebody's evil, so this is how I say evil. I use that word liberally, but if somebody's evil, somebody's evil. It doesn't really matter where they come from. If they're going to do something
Exactly.
wrong, they're going to hurt somebody. They're going to hurt somebody. But to stereotype and to discriminate and to speak poorly of people in a general sense, that's where I just get really, I feel like you just must know nothing then, because you're just basing it on what you think as opposed to what you know. And what you think is just on things, like I said, you could say you know, but you don't. It's horrible.
You don't really ever know if you're someone different. You can engage as much as you possibly can to learn, but to say you think or and it could still make you evil for saying something or acting on different things when it comes to that. And it's not just anti-Semitism, it's everything.
Yeah.
You see it with everything. We're seeing it today with voting rights being blocked in a lot of different states now, and bills being passed in Georgia that are specifically targeting minority groups, mainly Black groups, but specifically that because they don't want their voices heard. The legislators that are in power don't want their voices heard again because they know that the numbers are there to change it. And it's sad to see when people want to grasp onto power so much.
Yeah, and they'll use
that anywhere.
And they'll use fear, and that's where I have an issue. And then
totally.
And then I come and I'm talking to you on my podcast, and I'm like getting all fired up. But it's true.
Yeah. Well, what's really sad is that today you see fear being used more than actual agenda. Fear can't be the agenda if you want to accomplish things, in governance. You can run campaigns on fear and you can scare people, and it clearly works, as we've seen the numbers. It clearly does work to run on fear. But at the same time, you would hope that people would process, well, what are you trying to accomplish if you're the one in power? Fear isn't a political platform. It's just to win. And that should scare people itself. That should be what you should be afraid of, is I don't know what they're capable of if they're not telling me. At least someone else is telling me their agenda.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
This topic.
I know. It's easy for people like us to get really fired up on this thing.
So there's another interesting topic that I did want to touch on too. The idea of culture shock. Have you ever experienced culture shock? Do you believe culture shock is a thing?
Yes, absolutely. Many times. And reverse culture shock is also a thing.
Okay. I guess that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was fortunate that I had parents that wanted to save money for travel for themselves and for me. Growing up, I wasn't really enrolled in sports or too many extracurricular projects. I did karate for a little bit, but all that money that could have been used on that got put towards family trips. Mm-hmm. We were also fortunate to have connections from around the world, specifically Europe, and we were active with hosting exchange students. So I had been exposed to other cultures at a pretty early age, and little things can shock you when even in your own house. About the way people from somewhere else are behaving when they're with you. Most notably, when I went on my first personal student exchange year, I was in high school, 11th grade, and I went to Argentina and experienced culture shock there. So the biggest adjustment for me to see was machismo and male superiority to women in a home setting. So exceptions there, of course, are in the workforce and government. It's basically a social thing and in the home where that kind of gender division takes place. Mm-hmm. That took a lot of adjustment for me to see and just kind of accept that that's how it is. We don't really see that in the United States, at least not that openly.
Okay.
I'm sure there are couples and homes where somebody at home feels or exerts superiority to someone else, but we don't really see it here. It's not nearly as open as it is in a lot of Latin American countries. I could go on about like other culture shock examples. A big one would be tardiness, like in a lot of Caribbean countries, arriving late, and not just like socially. That's like the bus arrives late, or the train, or a tour guide arrives late, and you just kind of you get used to it in that sense. Culture shock's mostly experienced when you live somewhere instead of just visiting. You have more time to be immersed in it, or immersed in a place, which then presents more culture shock to you. And I'll use the time and punctuality example again when it comes to reverse culture shock. Is when I worked in Dominican Republic for 3 months. And it was, kind of a dream job, what I was doing. And I got used to the tardiness there. I got used to the bus driver was supposed to arrive to pick up me and the students I was chaperoning at 9 a.m. They didn't show up till 11:30.
Oh.
It was just something like, okay, I know I have more time. And I did. I get back to the United States, and it's like, it's to New York. And it's like, oh, my bus already left. I'm late. Now I'm the one that's late, So yeah, you do see reverse culture shock as well.
And that's really interesting because, like you said, I don't know, if you're just on a vacation, you wouldn't really necessarily feel it. Like, I think it depends. I think it definitely depends. Or if you do experience it, it's for a very short time. But, like you said, for
Right.
longer periods, like you just sort of either have to accept it, or like it's hard to rebel, especially if it involves other people, and other people are going to act how they act. So it's kind of, as long as it's not harmful towards you, then that's really
right. And a lot of it comes down to, there's this thing, you can't change people, but you can change your behavior around people. So I do not accept superiority amongst gender roles. That's something personally I'm like, no, treat everybody equally. Dishes aren't meant for one person, and cooking's not meant for somebody else, or clean, whatever. But I knew that I was not going to change an entire country because I believed that. It wasn't going to make me feel better that other people were appeasing me. I just kind of had to be like, okay, this is it. And I can not necessarily ignore it, because it was very hard to ignore, but I can just change my behavior around the situation.
And that's a good way to put that.
Yeah.
So you're, let's see. Do you ever experience loneliness in your job with your flexibility?
Yes and no. So for me, loneliness was pretty situational. I felt loneliness being by myself alone at home or in a hotel room, and I felt loneliness also in a crowd of people. The ability to be comfortable leads to inclusion, and feeling uncomfortable is what leads to loneliness. I enjoy solitude and time to myself, and I'm quite comfortable by myself, so that does help. I have a boyfriend. I have plenty of friends and supportive parents and family members. And, there are times when I may feel lonely, and I'm comfortable enough to reach out to any of them and connect with anybody that comes to mind first. So, it does happen. But I think often it roots from some kind of uncomfortable feeling.
Right. And like you said, you've learned how to, not necessarily adjust, but learned how to enjoy the solitude, because then there's times you're not going to be able to, whether it's working.
Absolutely. Yeah, the strongest relationship we'll ever have is the one with ourselves. So, you got to make ourselves entertaining first and foremost. Yeah, whatever that might mean. And, you can't be prepared to feel lonely. It's a human behavior. It just happens. And, it does, and it's how you deal with it. in any situation.
Now, I know we talked about the project for On This Day in Jewish History, but you have a couple of little projects you're working on. You work on some mosaic art and you do the scuba.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are those ways that, like, how do you fit those into your life and in your in the time you're not working?
Right. So both are areas of life that I'm passionate about, and they both free me from myself and allow me to be myself. I've always enjoyed art and being creative. I loved drawing and painting growing up, taking art classes, cooking classes. But when I found the world of mosaic art, I really honed in on it. There's something that is therapeutic about cutting glass and porcelain and holding the tools and the materials in your hand and then designing them any way you want. So, you know, like modern and contemporary art kind of broke the barrier of what defines beauty and art in general. And for me, mosaic became my way of breaking my strive for perfection from painting into something that demands imperfection. Some of the glass cuts I make, they're not perfect and they're not the way I intended to be, but you know, sure, you have some, you should have some internal direction of what cutting does and how to cut and know where and what tiles fit. But there's a lot of liberty in mosaic design. There's endless colors and materials to work from, you know, should you choose. I've played with lots of different designs and topics. I get inspired by different things and I like to test my limits with how I create these pieces. I do a lot of like wall hanging pieces. A recent piece I completed that you may or may not have seen online was my constellation design. So I wanted to explore star constellations in astronomy, and I wanted to see what that would look like in tile form. So I searched for images and I did some sketching, and then I created a nice, fairly large wall hanging mosaic of two people stargazing at a bunch of constellations. And then tying into scuba. So my favorite designs that I have done with mosaic involve marine and aquatic life and scuba, because it connects that world to me. Because it's a lot easier to go do mosaics than it is to go scuba dive, unfortunately. I first tried scuba when I was in high school, but I did not enjoy it because, as I found out later when I was in college, I had a deviated septum and I needed to have that corrected. It was too hard to breathe underwater, not being able to breathe out of one side of your nose.
Blowing out.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't clear a mask. I couldn't really breathe well with the regulator. But you know, then I went and I was working in Dominican Republic, and I got interested in marine ecology and conservation while I was there, because it was more specific to what I was doing, and I was learning about things I never really learned about, with, you know, literally saving the planet. And then I signed up for a scuba course. When I was there, I was like, okay, I'll just brave it. And being able to breathe by then made that possible. And I don't get to scuba too often, but I keep up with the diving world and follow several marine conservation groups in their efforts to protect our planet. Coral reef restoration is an example. You know, it's something, it's a big deal for me. I've enjoyed researching coral reef restoration and following different nonprofits. There's one in Miami, for example, that really does a lot of work there. That's probably the most domestic thing that we see going on, at least for reefs in the United States. It's not just vital for marine life sustainability, but for humans and ourselves as well. Coral reefs are really important for that. I've taken trips that are specifically designed for scuba, and you know, they're some of the best trips I've ever done, because it's just literally wake up, sleep, eat, dive, repeat, like so many t-shirts say. You know, last year before the pandemic, in January 2020, I went back to the Dominican Republic and I did my advanced PADI certification course. You learn a lot of fun skills that are beyond the basics you get from the open water course. You kind of get to learn what specific types of dives interest you or don't, for that matter. Like I like wreck diving, so I know I want to pursue more of wreck diving in the future. When I'm diving, I feel so free. I feel like I can fly, and I feel like I've been invited by the plants and animals I see in the water into their home for a brief visit. I know it sounds so simple, but it's so like sweet, but it's true. It's just, it takes you into this other state of being, and the underwater world we have on planet Earth is really an out of world experience for a lot of divers, and myself included. I know it's a bit cliche, but we don't ever forget our first breath underwater either. But we really don't. Because it's not just about the ability to breathe underwater the first time, it's the size and the physical ability of turning your body in an anti-gravity motion that you're doing for the first time, which, you know, then you become neutrally buoyant and learning different buoyancy techniques. When I dive, it just always mystifies me that I'm literally flying, something that humans are not designed to do, and it was never in our evolutionary plan. It's just underwater in the home of beautiful fish, sharks, turtles, corals, anything else that you happen to see. Last year I did a dive in Seattle and I saw a giant Pacific octopus, and I was like, oh my God, like it was like instant, a mix of instant shock and gratification at the same time.
Joseph, you're in the air, you're underwater. So next, are you gonna go in? Are you gonna go to the space hotel? I think like you would be like the first one going to the space hotel.
I would love to. I don't know if you might have to be invited. I don't know if I'll get invited, but I'd love to be. I would love to go to outer space or space hotel. Yeah, definitely. I don't know who to contact about that.
You gotta call your boy, I don't know. Your boy Elon probably. I don't know. And he's not the one running it though.
Yeah, probably. He's kind of, I don't know. He's an interesting person, but
for the next episode, all about Elon.
Yeah.
So what are your plans? I mean, I know you still are working, which is good. You're not unemployed. So you're just gonna spend the rest of the year obviously still working. I mean, do you have any travel plans or anything else that you're working on?
So I'm kind of focused right now on saving up to buy a house.
Okay.
I'm trying to kind of more geared into managing my finances because I'd really like to buy a house in California sometime in the next few years. But, you know, knowing that I have a travel bug, and I always have and probably will always have, I'll see what opportunities present themselves. I've always wanted to hike Mount Kilimanjaro, and I really would like to do that before I'm 35. So I have a little under 3 years to complete that. And, you know, I'd like to do that. So hopefully in the next few years, you'll see me doing that. I'd like to scuba dive more. That's something I'm always looking at with travel opportunities. And now that things are beginning to open up, definitely it's possible. But yeah, I've gotten kind of adjusted to being in my apartment in Seattle and exploring parts of Seattle that I hadn't gotten to see since I moved there in 2018, because I've been home so much over the last year. And that I'm really thankful for that. And I'll continue to see more areas of Washington State, hopefully soon.
That's great. Well, thank you, Joseph, for coming on. I'm so glad we got a chance to talk and obviously got a chance to catch up. But you know, you got to come back and tell us about all like your next adventures, because I feel like you have so many more coming up, and you got to bring on some art next time. The Mosaic.
Yeah. First, yeah, you're welcome. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. It's been like super fun to catch up and talk, and thank you for questioning me about my life. You know, it's fun to get to give a rundown about my experiences, because I really love getting to see the world as best I can, even in slow periods like now. And yeah, I'll try to bring some art to show and different things as well.
Well, if anything else, I feel like you definitely inspired some listeners to possibly go out there and start exploring the world before it's too late. So
yeah, I hope so.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in. If you are interested in being interviewed for Making It Here and There, please send an email to MIHATpodcast@gmail.com.
Making It Here and There is an interview series focusing on ways in which individuals are using communication across borders and across cultures to achieve understanding, learning, and overall consciousness of the world around us.